Welcome everyone on Zoom. How are you all? It's a pleasure to have Anthony Lee with us, who will be talking about an important subject and will be involving each and every one of you. So as you see us and you have a question or you want to bring something up, feel free to leave a comment on the Facebook comments or the YouTube comments, and we will get to you as soon as we see your comment. And likewise, those of you on Zoom, please put your questions, your items of concern down here in the chat. Plug it in, all your questions, your thoughts, and we will get to them as well. So today's speaker, I want to introduce everyone to Anthony Lee. Dr. Anthony Lee is a retired professor of African and African American history who taught most recently at UCLA and West Los Angeles College. He has published a number of books and papers on the history of the Baha'i faith in Africa and in Iran. He is co-owner of Kalamat Press, a small independent Baha'i publishing company. He is also a poet who, with the late Amin Banani, translated the poems of Tahirih and has published 5 other books of poetry in English and in English translation. Now, today's topic, what is race? What is racism? This is our discussion. The principle of racial unity. So the principles of racial equality and racial unity are central to the Baha'i teachings. Baha'is are working to establish a world civilization guided by the underlying principles of the oneness of mankind and of the attainment of unity and diversity. In consequence of this belief, Baha'is recognize the equality of all races and strive to eliminate all forms of racial prejudice and discrimination. Close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness, is one of the quotes. Because Baha'is attach such a great importance to encouraging unity, each Baha'i, while taking pride in his unique racial, ethnic, or cultural heritage, seeks above all to recognize and foster the common human and spiritual bonds that unite the human family, a family rich in diversity of races and cultures that compose it. So what are the Baha'i efforts to promote racial unity? In classes conducted by Baha'i communities in over 100 countries, children are being instructed in the principles of racial unity and equality and become aware of the problems of racial injustice, racial prejudice, and discrimination. Baha'i communities worldwide have cooperated with the United Nations programs in the field of eradicating racial discrimination. They have participated in human rights conferences and seminars and have actively sponsored commemorations of Human Rights Day and Race Unity Day in their individual localities. As early as the 1900s, we had something called Race Amity Day that was started. The everyday principles by which Baha'is and Baha'i communities conduct their lives offer further testimony to the deep commitment felt by Baha'is to the principle of racial unity. In Baha'i communities, at the local and national levels, individuals of all races associate regularly and freely in complete amity and concord. And of course, Baha'is are encouraged to marry between the races. The importance of a spiritual education. Prejudice can be eradicated only through a spiritual awakening. An awakening nurtured on the one hand by the independent investigation of truth, and on the other by proper guidance and direction. What is necessary then to eliminate racial prejudice is proper spiritual education. Education whose purpose is to promote that spirit of free inquiry which alone can break through racial stereotypes, while at the same time inculcating in human efforts, in human hearts and minds, the fundamental principle and truth of the organic oneness of mankind. So we have, of course, this information posted online if you want to look. We also have a previous recording of a previous presentation given by Richard Hollinger from the American Baha'i Community. We have that online on www.clearwaterbaha'is.org, either now on the homepage or on the blog page when it's made available there. So Dr. Lee, please take on it. Take the presentation from here.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeremiah, and aloha, everyone. It's good to see you, the ones I can see. A lot of people I can't see here. But we are going to talk today about race and the concept of race. And I will speak just for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we can have a full discussion of the topic. And I do invite you to interrupt me even during the 20 or 30 minutes if something is not clear or if you want to ask a question. I'll leave that up to Jeremiah, and I don't mind being interrupted at all. So feel free to do that. One of the most misunderstood concepts in our society is the concept of race. Uh, People are afraid of it and sometimes even afraid of the word. And racism is also something which is not understood and which people kind of are very afraid to talk about. They don't know what the language is that they should use, how they'll be looked at, how they'll be perceived, and how people will react. So it's important that we talk about this, and we'll talk about it in terms of the Baha'i teachings. So some people, people seem to feel, and this is the dominant idea of race in the United States, that this is a natural category, that it is determined by genetics, that these ideas of race have always existed and will always exist, that some people even feel that races were created by God, and that this is something found in the Bible or something like that. All of these ideas, however, are false and can easily be proven to be false. Race is a category created by human beings, and it has a rather recent history. First thing to understand is that race has absolutely nothing to do with genetics, even though race masquerades in our society as a genetic category. Like you could look at somebody's DNA and determine what race they were, or something like that. That's simply not true scientifically or any other kind of way. Race is not a genetic category, and it has nothing to do with genetics, even though it pretends to be a genetic category, and that can be proven very quickly and very easily. Let's say, for instance, just as a thought experiment, that if a person who is Black, who is categorized as Black and identifies as Black in the United States, has a child with somebody who is white and identifies as white. So in our society that is within the borders of the United States, what is the race of the child, who is born from a Black mother and a white father, let's say? Undeniably and quite clearly, the child is categorized as Black, and there's no further question about it. For instance, if everybody will remember, Barack Obama was the first Black president. Well, why is he Black? His mother was white. So this should be, he should be 50-50 genetically. Why is he being categorized as Black? Well, because that's the rule, and that's the way the society has set up these categories. Let's assume, God forbid, that now Barack Obama were to suddenly have a child by a white woman, and he has a child of his own now by a white woman. What would the race of the child be in the United States? And there's no question that even that child, who would be 1/4 Black, is categorized as Black in our society. And for many years, and maybe even today, and sometimes this has even been written into law, which is the one drop rule. And that was the law in some states, that anybody who had one drop of African heritage, or African blood, as they call it, would be automatically categorized as Black. Well, why? I mean, now we're not talking about genetics on any level. We're simply talking about human categories. And that's the way that race is understood and defined today, at least on an academic level in universities and in academic circles. Race is understood to be a socially constructed category. It has nothing to do with genetics or any, divine command. It's simply a socially constructed category. What does that mean? That means this is a category which society has decided to create for certain reasons, to place people in a hierarchy of superior and inferior. So all races, not only Black and white, but the recently discovered race of Latino, Asian, Native American, white, and so on. All of these categories are categories which historically have been constructed by society to meet certain needs. And these constructions can have a history. We can trace them and see when they developed and how they changed. So we can see historically, and I'm a historian, so I like to talk about history, that race is an idea which is not very old in human history. It kind of appeared in the 18th century in Europe and later in America, as Europeans began to discover the world more fully and understand that people looked different and had different physical characteristics. And then a whole field of physical anthropology developed in Europe, in which the Europeans tried to categorize people by races, and they collected skulls and they measured nose width and they measured jaws and classified hair and so on in an effort to scientifically divide people into discrete races. And that effort failed miserably after 100 years of research and categorization. It's just impossible to find any boundaries that separate people on the basis of race. As a matter of fact, it's very obvious that these races are simply created by society historically. And they're arbitrary. The physical differences between human beings just kind of blend organically as you move across geography, and there's no point at which there is a break. So why and how are Europeans doing this? Well, and Americans for that matter. It's useful in society, and particularly useful to the people who are on top, to have these categories which are created. In the 18th century, they kind of developed. In the 19th century, they became extremely important. People found these categories to be very rigid, especially in the early 20th century. By the middle 20th century, and especially because of the Holocaust in World War II, where Jews were racially categorized, again, simply arbitrarily on the basis of a social decision, which European society, especially German society, made about Jews, that they were a separate race. And on that basis, millions of people were exterminated. And as Jews in Germany and in Western Europe. Now, if those people had been in the United States, they would have been just classified as white, but they weren't, and they were racially marked and then killed. At that point, the idea of race started to look rather ugly, and people started to recoil from it. And then that's when academics got the insight that, well, these aren't genetic categories at all. These are categories that are produced and constructed by society. They're very different in different places and at different times. Therefore, the idea of race started to wane a little bit. It's certainly not gone. It's extremely important in the United States. And in the United States, everyone has a race. It's a very personal matter because everyone is assigned a race. Everybody knows exactly what your race is. Now, you may contest that. And you may argue against it, and you may, or you may embrace it for that matter and decide to celebrate the racial category that you're assigned, but you can't escape it. Just like gender, for instance, is another category assigned to you, which is inescapable. Now, that being said, we can look a little more carefully at the concept of race in the United States. It's one of the most important designations that anyone has. It determines, statistically at least, your socioeconomic category, your education, your job, and so on. You are very much classified by race. It determines who your friends are, what neighborhood you're going to live in, who's going to come to your birthday party, who will go into business with you, who will talk to you, and so on and so forth. So this is a very powerful category, and it must be produced by society and reproduced every day in order to maintain itself. So race is something which is constantly being reproduced in our society by people's attitudes, by speeches, by jokes, by film, by cartoons, and so on. And so, racial slurs and so on. This category constantly is reinforced and reproduced. But the category is always contested and it's always changing. If we were in the early 19th century, the category of white, for instance, was much more restricted than it is today. And the United States has found the usefulness of race to be very, very important to creating our society. So the problem that Americans faced was, how do you bring people from Europe who are, Russians, French, English, Irish, Belgians, Germans, and so on, and bring them to the United States and convince them that they are one people and that they have one nationality and that they should act together in solidarity. They certainly didn't do it in Europe, that's for sure, where they're constantly at war. Well, the way it was done in the United States was simply, I have a question here and I'm willing to break and answer it if Jeremiah tells me to. So I'm waiting for him to break me up here. But you found that if all of these people in the United States could be classified as white, then you could convince them that they are all one, that they should act together, that they're one people. And this happened gradually. For instance, when the Irish immigrated in large numbers to the United States at the beginning of the 19th century, they were not classified as white by any means. As a matter of fact, they were regarded as black and maybe even one step below black. But gradually over time and through some historical events like race riots that the Irish joined in, the Irish eventually were able to earn their place as white men and women. And whereas before everyone would think that Irish were, you know, kind of ape-like and drunkards and, you know, useless and so on. Now nobody cares if you're Irish, you're just white in the United States at least. That might be different in Europe, but here, you know, people are proud to be half Irish. It's not a problem. This is also true of Italians, for instance. Oh, by the way, there is a book called How the Irish Became White by Ignatieff. It's a little book, you might want to look it up. It's very interesting. Noel Ignatieff. There's another book called How Italians Became White Folks. It's also about Italians arriving in large numbers in the United States. Certainly were not regarded as white, and maybe in New York they still aren't, but in the rest of the country, they are certainly have moved into the white category, but that was a gradual process. The same thing with Jews, happened a little earlier with Jews in the United States, but you know, they were regarded as outside the racial hierarchy, and now Jews are just white. And that's the history of American immigration, where all groups of people from Europe, at least, have gradually entered the white category. There's only one group of people who will never become white and cannot become white by definition, and that is Black people, of course. And really, the category of white has been created and expanded, and it seems to be infinitely expandable at the expense of the Black population, which has been kept at the bottom of the hierarchy. Okay, let me just say 5 minutes about racism, because now we have a different idea. Race itself is not a fixed category. It has changed over time. It is always contested. It changes according to where you live, whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. It is movable, you know, it is, as a human concept, it's just very malleable. Racism is the idea that stems from the idea of race, that there are superior and inferior races, and that is a fixed truth in time, and therefore society is organized around that principle. Now we have the idea of systemic racism also. And the reason that this has arisen is because, as I said, in the beginning in the 1940s or so, the idea of race became kind of stigmatized, and nobody wanted to be called a racist. Nobody wanted to be called prejudiced. And if you ask people in the United States today, are you prejudiced? No one is going to admit to being prejudiced. Are you a racist? Oh no, I would never be a racist, and so on and so forth. It's just stigmatized. So the idea that anybody personally is responsible for racial injustice is just going to be denied. And yet we see very clearly in our society that the hierarchy of racial injustice continues, and Black people are victimized, especially by this system. And so we find that these ideas are baked into our society, so that no individual will take responsibility for this, but that the society is just set up that way. And so the ideas come that racism means that you're just being mean to somebody, or that you're calling somebody a name, or that you're being mean to a Black person, and that's racism. But that is not racism at all. You might call that prejudice or something like that, but nobody's going to admit to be prejudiced. Racism is much more profound and much more invisible. And then I'll just tell you a story about UCLA, where I taught, and explain how a systemic racism works. And that is several years ago, not that several, a few years ago at UCLA, there was an enormous scandal because the incoming class of freshmen consisted almost entirely of whites and Asians. UCLA is primarily a graduate school, but it admits 5,000 freshmen every spring to UCLA. And this particular year, out of those 5,000 freshmen, 57 of them were Black, a little over 1%. And of those 57 Black admissions, 40 of them, I believe, were through the athletic program and had nothing to do with the regular admission system. So actually, UCLA, out of 5,000 admissions, had admitted 17 Black students onto their campus through the regular system. And why is that? Because they were relying on SAT scores primarily. They were relying on grade point averages and other statistical metrics that were supposedly colorblind, quote unquote, and had nothing to do with race, but managed to systematically exclude almost 100% of the Black applicants. Well, why? Well, if you're relying on SAT scores, one of the things that you can do if you're an affluent family is have your children, your students, take classes that will raise your SAT scores. And according to these companies that give the classes, you can raise your scores 15 to 20 points simply by taking a class that tells you how to take the exam. Well, that would put you at an advantage if you can afford these classes. With grade point averages, in high schools, if you can take AP courses, that is advanced placement courses, you can have a grade point average above 4.0, because an A in the advanced placement classes gives you 5 points instead of 4 points. And therefore, if you take these AP classes, you can come to UCLA admissions with a grade point average of 4.3, 4.4. So these advanced placement classes were not offered in Black high schools at all. They just weren't available to most Black students. And therefore, even if you were a Black student, you had a 4.0 average, you couldn't compete with white students in wealthy white areas who were taking advanced placement classes. In addition to that, there's the whole inferiority of schools in Black neighborhoods that starts in grammar school and would not normally prepare most Black students for at least elite universities. And so on, and there's more, but the point is that this system was being administered by people, none of whom would admit or even claim to be prejudiced or racist, God forbid, and indeed they weren't. I mean, you could ask every admissions officer, every professor at UCLA, every student, are you racist? They'd all say no. But the system had produced a racist result of simply excluding Black students from campus, which indeed pretty much today they still are. Now they kind of fixed it a little bit, so now maybe they'll admit 200 Black students or something, but still the difference and the disparity is quite marked and quite devastating, actually, not only to the individuals, but to the Black community as a whole. I live in Manhattan Beach right now. This is an all-white community. It's a suburb of Los Angeles. It has been kept white since 1924, when the property of Black homeowners was confiscated by eminent domain by the city council, and the city was the Black population was simply erased, and then the city was kept white ever since by various mechanisms. Nobody in Manhattan Beach will admit to being racist, but it's an all-white community, so they don't have to be racist. I mean, they don't have to see Black people. The police can simply be told, you know, we don't want outsiders here. And anybody who's Black is automatically an outsider. So this is not a racist thing. It's just, you know, people from outside the community might cause trouble and so on. Again, this is institutional racism, where the city council tells us they're only interested in the opinions of residents and outsiders don't count. Which means, of course, by definition, they're only interested in the opinions of white people who live in the city, and they don't care about any other opinions or people. So that's racism. Okay, sorry, I could go on and on. Somebody should have stopped me. Jeremiah, I'm blaming you for this. But there is a quote from Abdu'l-Baha, which I have given.
There is a question for you before we move on to the quotes.
Good, good.
So back when we were talking about the Italians, Renee here asked, she says, that's where the term guineas came from, yes? My Italian friends and I discussed this.
Guinea? Is that what she said?
Guinea, yeah.
Yes, that's a coin, which was worth a little more than a pound in England. The gold that was used to mint the coin was had come from Africa. There's no gold in Europe. They don't have gold mines in Europe. All the gold in Europe was coming from either West Africa or Central Africa. And of course, everybody knew that. And so the coin was just nicknamed a guinea because the gold was African gold. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
More questions, please, before we go on and I bore everyone to death.
So there is a question about this concept of gentrification. So when someone increases the value of their property so they can make money and sell their property, those who live in a neighborhood who may not want to sell their home, but they don't have the money to afford the taxes to keep their home, they may be forced to sell because their home has increased in value.
Right.
And this happens just in typical context to poor people who can't pay for their taxes. But everyone, in particularly Africans, are disproportionately affected by this. What is, in your opinion, in the context of what I just described, the solution to this concept of gentrification where people are moved out of their neighborhoods?
Yeah, this is a complicated and multifactorial problem that is, as you described, that if there are poor neighborhoods that are, of low property value and usually all minority, sometimes these neighborhoods become targeted for renewal, and therefore, as people move in, and these are always white people and never Black people, and begin to improve the properties in the neighborhood, that the poorer people, most of whom are renting anyway, they're not owning this property, are pushed out as rents go up and property values go up. This does not happen by accident. This is not a coincidence. I mean, this just doesn't happen. That's another instance of institutional racism. Many times this process is pushed along by government policy. Special loans that are given to the renewal of neighborhoods. It's pushed along by realty companies and by other groups of people who specifically target these neighborhoods for gentrification. It's a complicated problem, however, because—
I have a question.
Okay. It's a complicated problem because these neighborhoods very often are falling apart, and you want to renew them and you want to give people a better place to live, but you want to do it in such a way that the people who live there are not pushed out into worse neighborhoods.
So I think
I got a
Matthew,
question. Yeah, there's a person named Maxine Waters who you always see on TV.
Yeah.
And you see her, and she's I guess her constituencies are a neighborhood that's all made up of the poor neighborhoods. But it's funny, now they say that she moved into an all-white neighborhood with guard gates. How do these people improve the situation, and people who even live there who represent them leave? Isn't there any way to stop that or to curb that? Because isn't that like reverse racism?
Well, she represents South Los Angeles, where Watts is. The neighborhood is almost completely Black, and she's represented them for many years. I haven't heard this idea that she's moved out of the area, and I don't think it's possible for her to move out of the area and retain her her congressional seat.
Well, they showed her neighborhood, and they put her on two different news, or three actually, NPR, Fox, and another one, where she was in a different neighborhood, and they put her address on TV, and it was quickly taken down the next day because I guess when she got involved with the Democrats and screaming at the Republicans to hunt,
well, it
them,
would be dangerous. Yeah, she's a very controversial figure. I'm afraid I can't answer that question because I haven't seen that news. But I know she would have to live at least in the district if she's going to retain her congressional.
Well, there was a gentleman who was living in there to try to get in, and I don't know if he did, but they were showing all the monies that were supposed to go there aren't going there. I don't know how Baha'i faith can get involved in helping the people that are involved in that particular situation where the government's against them.
Yeah, well, this is a very complicated and difficult and multi-layered problem. It doesn't admit to an easy solution. The whole structure of society is structured around race and racial disparity. So Baha'is are working and have worked individually and collectively to alleviate racial disparity and to teach racial unity. But it's not going to go away soon. So we just keep working, and we try to make gradual improvements.
Thank you, because that makes a lot more sense. I guess over time, the situations do end up getting fixed. Thank you for your time.
Well, either that or they don't. I mean, but
Well, I hope they do.
sometimes they don't get fixed. But my point is that it's not a question of a solution. There is no solution. I mean, or if there is a solution, would somebody please tell me what it is, so tomorrow we can just implement it and get rid of this problem? No, this is a very deep and multi-layered historical problem, which has to be addressed at its foundations over time, and which we will spend our entire lifetimes, and probably our children's lifetimes, working to change. And it's I mean, to ask what is the solution is like asking, what is the solution to evil? Well, there isn't a solution to evil. I mean, evil is a human condition, and it's part of a human problem that we all have to be aware of and we all have to work against. And it's not going to go away. I mean, so, we're not waiting for the day when there's no evil. We hope that there's always improvement and that there's a constant betterment of human society and human behavior. And that's all we can hope for.
Thank you very much.
Sure, that's great, Matthew. I loved your question. More questions?
I think now's a good time for us to move to the quotes.
No, okay, you can go. The first one is a quote by Abdu'l-Baha, who was the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith and who visited the United States in 1912 and faced this problem head on, the problem of racism. And when he saw the problem, I mean, of course, he knew there was a race problem before he got here, but he was invited to Washington, D.C., to the home of a very prominent white Baha'i woman, Agnes Parsons. He stayed in her home for a while. And he saw in Washington, D.C., which was a segregated city by law, racism head on. And Abdu'l-Baha was absolutely horrified. And he began to give talks in the United States about the unity of the races and against racism. This is one of his quotes, and Jeremiah can show it to us maybe and read it for us.
So which quote is specifically?
Oh, it's the one by Abdu'l-Baha, the first one about race, not the one by Shoghi Effendi. How does it start? These divisions were
in a moment.
I'll tell you if you have the right one. Yes, all prejudice is against the will and plan of God. Yeah, somebody can read that.
We would love a volunteer reader. So Let's see. Alex, you had your camera on. If you would like to be the person to read, we'd appreciate it.
Got it. All prejudices are against the will and plan of God. Consider, for instance, racial distinction and enmity. All humanity are the children of God. They belong to the same family, to the same original race. There can be no multiplicity of races, since all are the descendants of Adam. This signifies that racial assumption and distinction are nothing but superstition. In the estimate of God, there are no English, French, Germans, Turkish, or Persians. All these in the presence of God are equal. They are of one race and creation.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? Here you can see clearly Abdu'l-Baha recognized that racial categories are socially constructed, that they are not created by God. And he would realize that coming from a different culture and society, which had a whole different way of organizing people, mostly around religion and not around race at all. And when he got to the United States and saw these divisions, he was just horrified. Also, it's interesting to note from a historical point of view that in 1912, they were still talking about English, French, German, Turkish, and so on as different race. We wouldn't think of them that way today because the idea of race, and particularly the idea of whiteness, has changed and expanded. So we would think of English, French, and Germans all as just being white. That was not the case in 1912 in the United States or in Europe. Okay, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
All these in the presence of God are equal. They are of one race and creation. God did not make these divisions.
Yes, God did not make these divisions. You see, he was talking to people who were telling him these divisions were made by God. How can you? Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
These distinctions have had
there's more.
Their origin in man himself. Therefore, as they are against the plan and purpose of reality, they are false and imaginary. We are of one physical race, even as we are of one physical plan of material body, each endowed with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 head, 2 feet. Among the animals, racial prejudice does not exist. Consider the doves. There is no distinction as to whether it is an oriental or an occidental dove. The sheep are all of one race. There is no assumption of distinction between Eastern and Western sheep. When they meet, they associate with perfect fellowship. If a dove from the West should go on to the Orient, it will associate with the Eastern doves unhesitatingly. There will be no attitude of unwillingness, as if saying, you belong to the East. I am from the West. It is reasonable or allowable that a racial prejudice, which is not observed by the animal kingdom, should be entertained by man. Abdu'l-Baha, yes. Promulgation of Universal Peace.
Yeah, he's pretty emphatic and categorical here. And he would be because he's encountering a social construction which everyone at the time was acting as though it were perfectly normal and natural and God given, and he knew very well it was not. And so this is Abdu'l-Baha's statement and his, what's the word I'm looking for? His validation that race is really socially constructed. Are there other comments, or we want a discussion here?
Alex is raising his hand, I see.
Yeah. When you first started, you were talking about the Jews in Germany, how they were considered racism. But history shows us, and I think it shows us that in the act of trying to kill the Jews, they started killing all people who objected to their way of life. Even the Baha'is were killed. The Gypsies who lived in the area were killed. Anybody who, I guess you might say, opposed what they believed at the time were considered to be eradicated as the Jews were. So, which tells me that they used the idea of racism just to get rid of people who they thought had the power to stop them had they chose to do so. And anybody else, like the Baha'is or anything like that, who also had the possibility of stopping them because of what the Baha'is were teaching about the unity of mankind. So it's like they used racism, but what they were doing is anybody who opposed them were being killed.
Yeah, certainly. The extermination of people by the Nazi regime went way beyond the Jews. They exterminated anyone who was different. Homosexuals were rounded up and killed. Uh, People in institutions, mental institutions, people with mental retardation, communists were rounded up and killed. Some Baha'is were sent to concentration camp, mostly on the basis that they were Jews, but and so on. Yeah, the idea of race is used for various purposes. It's not simply a static idea. That's also true in the United States. The idea of race is used to classify people, and it's to the great advantage of other classes of people. It's used to convince people that society is a zero-sum game. And that just means that if anything, Black people gain, white people are losing. And if we give Black people anything, we're taking something away from you as white people, and so on. If Black people get into college, that means that some white person has been knocked off. If Black people get a job, that means that some white person has been, excluded from, and so on and so forth. I mean, race is very useful in that way, not only in Germany, but also in our own country. And that's why it's so evil and insidious. More ideas and comments, I hope. All right, speak up, people. Don't be shy.
So I am also looking at those on Facebook and YouTube, the comments that are there as well.
Anything? And I could go on, and you better stop me. Okay, well, let's look at racism again from a Baha'i perspective. The idea of the Baha'i faith as a way to combat this is not that we just are nice to everybody. That's just not enough. And of course, you should be nice to everybody, and you should love everyone, and you should help everyone who can come in contact with, and that's a Christian idea, which Baha'is embrace as well. But the Baha'i teachings go much further than that. The Baha'i faith recognizes that there has to be institutional change if we're going to address this problem, that the institutions of society must change, and they must change towards the concept of the unity of humanity. So we can put up the next quote, Jeremiah, if you like, or John. John, are you the one doing this? Jeremiah. There we go. Now we need somebody to read this quote. This quote is from the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, and he is addressing the idea of institutions that must be created to bring about a new kind of human society.
Let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot round which all the teachings of Allah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. Its appeal is not to be merely identified with the reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men, nor does it aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations.
Yes, let me interrupt you for a minute. I'm sorry. Yes, you can see what Shoghi Effendi is saying here is that this isn't just a matter of emotion. It isn't just a matter of everybody feeling good and being nice and smiling. This is much deeper, much more profound, and much more serious. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Its implications are deeper. It claims greater than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance. Its message is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the states and nations as members of one human family. It does not constitute merely the enunciation of an ideal, but stands inseparably associated with an institution adequate to embody its truth, demonstrate its validity, and perpetuate its influence. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced.
Yeah, let me interrupt you and emphasize that, an organic change in the structure. And here we're talking racism as opposed to prejudice, okay? That this institutional racism, the structures which have been created by society to maintain this construction, this idea, those have to change organically, according to the Guardian, a change such as the world has not yet witnessed. Okay, go ahead, Regina, sorry.
That's quite all right. It constitutes a challenge at once bold and universal to outworn shibboleths of national creeds, creeds that have had their day and which must, in the ordinary course of events as shaped and controlled by providence, give way to a new gospel, fundamentally different from and infinitely superior to what the world has already conceived. It calls for no less than the reconstruction and the demilitarization of the whole civilized world, a world organically unified in all the essential aspects of its life, its political machinery, its spiritual aspiration, its trade and finance, its script and language, and yet infinite in the diversity of the national characteristics of its federated units.
Yes, and here we have unity and diversity. And of course, the Guardian is talking about a world a world scale of unity where the world comes together as one. And he talks about discarding the outworn creeds, national creeds, which have held the world behind. And this includes our national creed. Our national creed is a white nation, a melting pot nation in which all the nations of Europe come and melt into one white society. That is a new race of Americans, a melting pot, which clearly did not include Black people. They would have messed up the pot, or Asians, or well, maybe Asians and Latin Americans will make it eventually, but not now. So though that national creed has to go, and we have to embrace the idea of a multiracial society. Okay, comments about this, guys?
So we have a raised hand from Francis Hayden.
Good.
Hi, Jeremiah. Hi, your presenter. It's I've been listening.
Tony.
Hey, Tony. Sorry, I don't have my picture on now, but I just want to keep this on a more general level. I've had let's say conversations with let's say there's been a point of view put forward to me by someone that I think there's an idea out there that you encounter a Baha'i who may be very loyal Baha'i who feels that the National Assembly is harping too much on race. Have you heard that? And how do you approach it? I've had like I think I listened to somebody for an hour and a half once, and I just wasn't sure how to, because I didn't want to invalidate the point of view, but it was like going overboard on race in this country, on racism among the Baha'is.
Baha'is are.
Do you deal with this yourself? Has this happened to you?
Not so directly, no. But Baha'is are human beings too, and Baha'is are subject to all the attitudes of the wider society. And we have to be prepared within the Baha'i community to have sessions like this one and to talk about and deal with issues of race and racism. I would not expect that every Baha'i is at the same place here. And so, you just listen and maybe make the suggestion that they need to read something about this. But up to just recently, a year ago, there was this idea, especially under Barack Obama, that since we had elected a Black president, that there was no more problem of race or racism in the United States. That was all behind us now. And so we didn't have to think about it anymore.
Can I have a follow-up question to that? The specific issue was the term most vital and challenging issue.
Yeah.
And the debate was, is it still the most vital and challenging issue, or only in 1938?
Well, it sure as hell is. Well, if there was any question about it, we have a year ago reached a new point in American history where suddenly, because of the killing of George Floyd in Milwaukee, there was a sudden reawakening of the need to face this issue squarely. And there were demonstrations that erupted all over the United States in huge numbers. And for the first time, large numbers of white people, and sometimes even majority white people, were involved in these demonstrations, asking and demanding racial justice and equality and so on. This really has opened a new chapter in American history, and it's one that cannot be ignored. And it's one that Baha'i should have been waiting for, because we have something to say about this. Yeah, the problem of race and racism is still very much with us. And the oppression of Black people in the United States is still very much with us, even if it isn't in the headlines. But if you look at every metric of American society, whether it's life expectancy, health issues, access to health care, education, income, wealth, incarceration, on and on and on, you'll find that Black people in the United States invariably end up at the very bottom of the pile. Every single time. Pick any issue you want, and Black people are there at the bottom. And why, we have to ask, why is this true? Well, the popular answer is, well, obviously there's something wrong with Black people. They don't act right or whatever it is. But that, of course, is an answer based on race. And it's fundamentally a racist response to what is a institutional problem.
So there's a question about a personal problem.
Sure.
And, Renee's brought this point up, and I'm going to read from her question.
Please.
So Renee says, and if Renee, you want to say it yourself, you're welcome to. She says she struggles with being stuck between acknowledging groups' differences, now the request, and being accused of being prejudiced if she does acknowledge the differences. She feels that she is asked to simultaneously acknowledge but also not acknowledge differences or cultures, to consider but also not consider differences between race groups or cultures, to not generalize but then to also acknowledge that there are generalizations. She's asking if it makes sense, as it is a paradox to her. Many of my friends, she says, who are not white ask different approaches from me. This is Renee, and it is difficult to navigate at times. She wants to treat everyone with as much love as she can, and she seems to always slip up, as she put it, with each individual in some way.
Well, yeah, that's okay. Don't worry about that. You're trying. You're doing.
You want to know how to navigate from a Baha'i point of view.
Yeah, and that's what you should be doing. And these conversations are difficult. This isn't easy, and it's not going to be easy. It's a very complicated problem, full of minefields that are going to blow up in your face. You're going to have difficult conversations with people of all different kinds and with people with different ideas, and that's great. I mean, let it happen. It's beautiful. It's important. Continue to do what you're doing. Try as hard as you can. Know that you're going to get hurt sometimes, and maybe even you're going to hurt other people sometimes, unintentionally, of course. And that's okay. That's fine. You're not perfect, and neither are they. And you just have to navigate this minefield, which is very painful. It's painful to Black people. It's painful to any white person of goodwill who is trying to establish authentic relationships with others. And that's, I mean, Renee, I want to cry. You are beautiful, and just keep doing what you're doing.
All right. Well, thank you, Renee, for that heartfelt question. So there's a question from Jeremiah, and his question is the best way to really start this conversation regarding race for Baha'is to actually integrate with many different peoples on a personal level? And I'll add on to that about marrying between the races.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Abdu'l-Baha in 1912 openly and publicly encouraged interracial marriage. This made headlines in American newspapers. He actually insisted that Louis Gregory, who was a Black lawyer, American, marry Louisa Matthews, who was a white woman. And he insisted that they do this as a example of Baha'i teachings. So yes, interracial marriage is not only allowed, it's actively encouraged, going back 100 years. So Baha'is don't have to make any apology for that one. Yes, I think Baha'is, white Baha'is, of course, need to make an effort to, in their personal lives and their social lives, seek out and include people of all colors and backgrounds in their social circle, no matter how uncomfortable that might be to begin with. But that's something we all need to do. Black Baha'is as well have an obligation to, as Baha'is, to give up their suspicions and to forgive mistakes and gaffes and missteps and so on, and to allow themselves to trust white people. It's not easy, and it's a burden for everybody, but that's the burden that history has given us, and we just have to take it up. So yes, this is a matter of personal choice and relationship. Beyond that, we have to work in society to change laws and institutions that are structurally racist and structurally oppressive.
Thank you.
Sure, more questions, please.
There is a question from both myself and Jeremiah, and this is something we wanted to ask you from the beginning. So, are there quotes and books in the Baha'i writings that highlight specifically this topic that you would recommend personally for further study and deepening? And after that, of course, the audience should, I assume, start investigating this subject. Where should we start investigating it?
Yeah, there have been compilations. One that was done by the National Assembly some years ago, I think is still available, called The Power of Race Unity. It's just a compilation of many, many quotes. And there are a number of other Baha'i compilations. I think it's probably easier to find quotations on the unity of humanity in the Baha'i writings than it is to find anything else, actually. It's not only a matter of quotations, however. It's also a matter of history. I did recommend that talk by Richard Hollinger. I think everybody was given the link to it. It's really very heartening to see, because he is able to show the 100-year history of Baha'is working for racial unity in the United States. So start there, it'll just make you feel good. And you can see that Baha'is have been working towards this goal, well, since 1912, when Abdu'l-Baha, put it on the Baha'i agenda. But there is the book To Move the World, which is a biography of Louis Gregory. It's a pretty thick book, but it's very good. And it also provides a pretty good history of Louis Gregory, who was the Black Baha'i I mentioned, who was more or less forced to marry this woman. She liked him a lot, by the way. I don't know if he was so into her, but anyway, they got married and they remained married for decades. Just look around. There's plenty to read and to see. Yeah, okay.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So I think that this is a good place for us to, Jeremiah is sharing this. So everyone in your chat who's on Zoom, we have the link to the previous mentioned talks, 100-year history of the Baha'i faith. And if you click on that link, you can save that link for your own.
This is not me. It's Richard Hollinger, who is a Baha'i in Maine. He's an archivist, and he spent many years researching the history of race relations in the Baha'i community.
And if you could place this as well in the, I suppose, in the YouTube and the Facebook description, people can also pull it from there.
Okay, so there's no right or wrong way to do this. We all have to work in our own ways and as hard as we can, and with the guidance of the House of Justice and the National Assembly and the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. And we do the best we can. I mean, nobody's perfect and nobody's expected to be perfect. We are all working towards the same end. And individually, we have to do it. And as Baha'i communities, we have to work together to do this, as we have. I mean, this isn't anything new. This is an issue in American history which has been there from the beginning. It's sometimes called the original sin of American history, is slavery and racism. It's been around for 400 years and it's not going anyplace. So we simply have to engage just as we engage any other evil in society and do the best we can, that's all. And that's all that anybody can ask. I mean, that's all that Abdu'l-Baha asks. Does Alex have a question? No?
I got one more for you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I looked at the news a lot. I see TV commercials. People have asked me, what does the Baha'i think about Black Lives Matters on TVs? Because some of the journalists are saying that it was started by Communist Party members to be political. Then you have people that say you should march in their thing and you should hold up a banner. Then you have people that says the Baha'i said not to do that. And then National said one thing or the other. I'm getting like different opinions from different Baha'is. I didn't know if you have a answer to set straight the opinion of that movement.
Yeah.
As it affects us, because I had people ask me about this. And I like to tell them the right thing, not be in the dark about it. If you could, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any Black movement, you're going to have to understand, is going to be controversial and it's going to be opposed. That's used to be true of the NAACP, which was demonized as a communist organization for decades and decades. It's true of CORE and SNCC and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Martin Luther King and everybody. It's the whole history of Black movements that they are a kind of slandered, opposed, demonized, and regarded as un-American, and on and on and on. So you have to expect that. Any Black movement is going to face this, and there are no exceptions. And Black Lives Matter is certainly not an exception. I have to tell you, I have a Black Lives Matter sign in front of my house right now. It says Black Lives Matter along with other things. But, and it's very controversial. I don't know why it should be controversial to say that Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black lives don't matter? I mean, what? It just is very difficult for me. People usually reply, well, all lives matter. And yeah, all lives do matter. So does that mean that Black lives don't matter? I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know it's kind of confusing because then it was like some of the older white people that I come across in my insurance business, they're going, well, that's racist. They're racist. I go, racist? Because all lives matter, not just Black lives. I'm thinking, well, and all of a sudden they get angry.
Yeah,
and they're mad about it.
Well, there you have it. There you have institutional racism facing you. Why shouldn't Black lives matter? I mean, that doesn't mean that anybody else's life doesn't matter, unless you're playing this zero-sum game again, that if Black lives matter, that means you're taking something away from me. I mean, which doesn't make any sense, of course, but that's the way people think and feel because that's what they've been told to think and feel. That every time Black people are going to get something, white people are going to lose something. Even the idea that their lives matter is threatening to white people because unspoken, of course, is that, well, if their lives matter, that means my life doesn't matter, which is just crazy. I mean, that just doesn't make it.
Yeah, because when they do the marches on TV, you see a lot of white people in there, a lot of Hispanics and people of all colors, really. You know, I mean, I don't see why.
Yeah, lately the majority are white people who are marching for Black rights.
Yeah.
But you see, once you're stuck in this zero-sum game and you have this racial category that you're working with as fundamental, that means any time any Black person does anything, it means you're taking something away from a white person. Because
Wow.
that's the game, you see. And once you set that up, then you can't give Black people anything. Because if they get anything, that means you're losing something. Now that makes no sense whatsoever,
No.
but that's the way
No.
the society has constructed this racial category.
It's
And
a
so-
shame because like the first responders and the doctors and the nurses, I mean, when you're in need, it's a lot of people of all colors and races are in the health field. It's crazy. I thought
Well,
they
and
would be more.
need health assistance. You even see this with COVID vaccines, where any effort to give COVID vaccines to minority communities that are underserved is suddenly opposed because that means you must be taking vaccines away from white people. I mean, it's just, you find it everywhere and it's not going away. We just have to oppose that way of thinking. That's all.
And I guess as the younger generation will have to do that. And then as the older generation passes on, their hatred will die with them. Hopefully.
Well, let's hope. But the younger generation will have to do it, and their children will have to continue it, and their grandchildren are going to have to continue it. And it just goes on. I mean,
yeah, but thank God made them all different colors for a reason. So there's got to be a purpose in all of this.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Alec. I mean, Matthew, sorry.
Okay, you got it. I'll go by anything. Call me Mud. You got it. Bye.
Bye. Are there other questions, Jeremiah?
Let's see. So Jeremiah, do we have any other questions? I'm looking. I'm sorry if you're on Facebook.
Not that I see.
Okay, well, great.
Oh, there is a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh wait, Francis already asked this question. He put it on. He put it on Facebook too. Never mind. I'm not going to repeat the same question. Okay, let's see. So he did get his question answered. Jeremiah, do you see anything on the YouTube or no? Because I haven't seen anything. Nothing new on the YouTube. So if we didn't get to your question, we're sorry. Please send us your question through www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. Go through the contact tab and leave us your question there, and we will get your question to Dr. Lee over here, and he'll be glad to answer your question.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, please, sir.
Well, nothing. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. I'm just so happy that you invited me, and this was a great session. And you guys are just doing it.
Did you try again?
What was that?
What about white fragility?
Oh, white fragility. Well, yeah, we've been talking about white fragility, but there is a book by that name, which I can recommend. Well, there are dozens of books. The one I just looked at recently is called Racism's Hidden Cost, and it's by, what's her name? Heather McGhee, a really brilliant book. It's not a Baha'i book, of course, but the fragility of white people has to do with this idea of losing something if race is taken into consideration. That, I mean, that's what is behind it, of course. And you heard it a little bit here, that anytime Black Lives Matter is brought up, somebody gets angry and blows up. Well, why? I mean, why would you be so fragile as not to be able to hear that? or what was the other one that was said?
So there's a question for you.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on South Africa's transition to Black government without bloodshed?
That was miraculous, actually. And it was largely the doing of one man, Nelson Mandela, who was committed to a multiracial society. And South Africa is nowhere near a perfect society, and the government that resulted has all kinds of problems and corruption and so on and so forth. But they were able to achieve their revolution without bloodshed, primarily because of this one individual. Even he broke with his other revolutionaries to collaborate with the white government of South Africa, and he achieved his goals almost miraculously in his own lifetime. Not that he didn't pay for it. I mean, he was in prison for 27 years or something. But that is the kind of change which we hope we can achieve everywhere.
That is a great question. Thank you for answering it. And it's definitely something, hopefully, given these Baha'i teachings, we have to look forward to, something that is more peaceful, something that is more unified. And I still can't forget going back to this. I think you may have brought it up last time. You may have spoken when Ria Khanum was in a room with several Baha'is, and there was this gentleman who he declared his faith, that he was a Baha'i, and it was because of the way that the child treated him. Are you familiar?
No, I didn't hear that, no.
So there is this story where Ria Khanum is with Baha'is, and there's this African-American gentleman who is not a Baha'i, and one of the Baha'i children sat on his lap and gave him affection. And just the simple act of not having that barrier, which apparently people have too much of, that child was taught not to have racism, that the child's act of affection caused that man to realize, to recognize the message of Baha'u'llah and its transformation that it will have for the rest of society, if only we listen to it.
Yes. And that's not a one-off, by the way. I've heard stories like this. I know in my own community at a fireside some years ago, actually, there was a Black man, and the white Baha'is were telling him about the unity of humanity and the elimination of prejudice and all that. And he said, okay, I hear all that from you. I'm not listening. I'm going to ask your children what they think, because that's where I'm going to get the real story. And he did. And he asked the little boy who happened to be there, what do you think about race? And he gave him the same answer, that all people are one, and we believe in the unity of the races. And this little kid was about, 8 or 9 years old. And he did declare, he was convinced, he was blown away, actually, by the children. Yeah.
So here's the last question on the matter. And this question is the elimination of the race question from government classifications in all interactions with its citizens a better approach to equality? Eliminating that checkbox.
Oh, no, that won't do anything. Those boxes are just there for government purposes. And if you eliminated those boxes, it wouldn't change the categories in society one bit. Those are baked into our history and into our society as we know it. The Baha'i principle, which is a whole nother topic, is that nothing on earth is inherently good or evil. It is the use to which these things are put which creates their value. So the boxes there could be used for good if you realize from counting racial disparities that, you know, some section of government is all white. Maybe you could act to change that. But nothing, no single piece of human society is either good or evil. It's the way human beings use it that will determine whether it is for good or for bad.
That actually is a very interesting point, because I was exposed to the Baha'i message personally as I grew up throughout my life. And what's so interesting is also being exposed to science and other parts of education. You know, they teach you about biodiversity, how important it is if you study any biological class relating to the study of biology. And in general, the Baha'i faith, our watchword is unity and diversity. So to me, I was taught at least that diversity is our strength, not our weakness. Diversity is what we have to glorify, not demonize. And the fact that the society around us doesn't see it that way, I feel is a huge contribution Baha'is can make to our society, to literally give people the respect of their contributions that they uniquely give to this society. And every person has something unique to offer. It doesn't matter if you're even of the same race. People are so different, even in the same race, by current classification standards. So think about a world where we unify all these diverse peoples. That is something to see, and a beautiful dream to materialize into reality very soon.
Maybe not so soon, but we're trying. I mean, we'll keep working.
I'll tell you, we've been shocked. Things have happened when we thought wouldn't happen. You never know. And maybe this generation, maybe next generation.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
can only work towards it, right?
Yeah, well, just keep struggling, keep having the difficult conversations, keep working towards change, and it'll happen.
Yes. Well, we really appreciate having you today. It was a very fruitful discussion. A lot of people, I think, got a lot of new scintillating conversation points today. So again, thank you for joining us. Well, you're having people in the chat also telling you thank you.
Yeah.
Again, more importantly, we wish you a beautiful week, everyone here. And we have our next Sunday meeting on clearwaterbahais.org. You can pull the Zoom link. It's the same link as today. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, great. Okay, you guys, John and Jeremiah, you're awesome. Just keep doing what you're doing. Okay, bye now.
And more importantly, we look forward to having you very soon.
Thanks. Bye.